National unity is not something unique to the Jewish people, but what is unique about Jewish unity is that it is not simply shared ideals or uniting for a common cause. Commenting on the pasuk that says that the Jewish people camped at the foot of Mount Sinai, Rashi says it means Vayichan Sham Yisrael, which is in the singular. He camped there, Israel, that the entire Jewish people was as one person with a single heart. And that's as opposed to other places. But all the other travels that the Jews had in the desert, there was always grumbling and there was conflict. Now, by Pashtas Nira, it would appear that Rashi's intention is that Rashi wants to analyze the pasuk and explain in a similar way to the midrashic source the Mechilta does, which is that here the pasuk says the word Vayichan, which is in the singular, which is unlike other references in the Torah, where it's always and they camped in the plural. So therefore Rashi wants to explain it's because this particular time that they camped in this particular spot at Har Sinai was it was like one person with a single heart. But all the other camps that they stayed at, there was a lot of discord. And therefore it would appear that Rashi is saying, like the Mechilta, everywhere else is in the plural to emphasize the fact that there is disparity, and here it's in the singular to emphasize the fact that there is unity. That's what it would seem. But there's got to be more to the story when you consider what Rashi quoted as the heading for this particular Rashi. And we need to understand. Let's assume that Rashi is speaking as the Medrash Mechilta does, and the whole basis of his interpretation is because of the word in the singular Vayichan L'Shon Yochid. Then the only word from the pasuk that Rashi should have quoted as his heading for this commentary should have just been the word Vayichan. Why did he say as the heading not only Vayichan and he camped, which is the word that apparently gives Rashi this insight? Why does he also add the words Sham there and Yisro, the Jewish people? Now, to say that why put the word Sham, well, that should be fairly easy to explain. We could say that the addition of the word Sham over there is L'Shitas Rashi, following the logic that Rashi uses. That because Rashi wants us to know that all the other times the Jews camped, there was some kind of fighting or argument going on, or splitting. So it could be that Rashi is telling us we don't only know that information because, like the Mechilta says, everywhere else camping is used in the plural. But Rashi would seem to be telling us that there's something in our pasuk that highlights exactly that information. Vayichan Sham, that camping as a singular entity was only there. It's only there at Har Sinai. That was the only place where everybody was united as a single entity, like one person with a shared heart, and nowhere else. And that would actually be fine. If Rashi had said Vayichan Sham, that would be fine. Maybe Rashi is even saying more than that. The only way that we know that Vayachanu in the plural everywhere else implies discord is only from this place. Because the Torah specified there at Sinai, that's where they were united. Because the reality is, to use a plural word when you're referring to a great group of people and saying they camped, you could explain that very simply. That it was a group of very diverse people who all happened to be camping in the same place. It doesn't mean that they had to have any discord between them just because it's in the plural. So the word Sham makes sense as part of Rashi's title, but the real question is going to be why did Rashi use the word Yisrael as part of his headline? Actually, using the word Yisrael seems to conflict with Rashi's point. The fact that Rashi quotes the word Yisrael, af makshel pirush Rashi, will actually contradict what Rashi is trying to tell us. Because the moment the Torah uses the word Yisro, which is a collective noun, which means that you have millions of people here referred to as a singular entity, the nation, Israel, If that's the case, then it actually makes sense to use a singular word, vayichan, to camp. And that entity, called the nation of Israel, camped in the singular. That would actually make sense. And once Rashi has introduced the word Yisro into the mix, then how does Rashi learn from the words of this pasuk that it's actually saying everybody was united in a unique way as one person with one heart? Where do you see that? Now, perhaps we could suggest that maybe, unlike the Mechilta, Rashi is more concerned not just simply with the singular word Vayichan, which is in the singular form. And maybe what bothers Rashi is the fact that the same pasuk seems to change the grammatical context. The beginning of this same pasuk says, and they camped in the desert, l'shoin rabim, in the plural. And immediately following that, then the Torah says, and he camped in the singular. Maybe that's what's bothering Rashi. The fact that the Torah changed its grammatical setting from plural to singular in one sentence would indicate that when they arrived across from the mountain, when they were in the desert of Sinai, there was still the diversity. When they got to the mountain, now there was suddenly a new experience, that they were like a single entity. Maybe that's what's bothering Rashi. The only problem with that is it's not uncommon for the Torah to do exactly that, to use two different grammatical settings in the same sentence. There are many places in Torah when in reference to the Jewish people you have plural and singular in the same sentence. In one pasuk, in one context. Let's use an example from our own parsha. The people saw, the word vayar is in the singular. Vayonu, vayamdu meirachik, and they trembled and they stood at a distance, are both in the plural. Same pasuk. Look at last week's parasha. Also, vayar yisolis yod hagdola chulei. The nation saw Hashem's powerful arm or hand. That's in the singular. Vayiru ha'am gomer, vayaminu gomer. And they feared Hashem and they trusted, they believed in Hashem. Those are both plural words. So it can't be that Rashi is so shocked at the concept of the Torah changing from singular to plural or plural to singular in a single pasuk, because it happens elsewhere. So what's driving Rashi, and how does Yisro not undermine the fact that Vayichan should be in the singular and there's no need for a deeper explanation? Now, we also have to understand that it would appear, as we already noted earlier, that Rashi is basing his commentary on the Mechilta, in which case we have to say, well, why does Rashi then say it differently, quite differently to how the Mechilta says effectively the same things? But Pashas Mekarish Rashi hu b'Mechilta, it would appear that Rashi's basis is the Mechilta, not other Midrashim who say similar things. The problem is, Mechilta, look how the Mechilta describes it. It says, Kol Mokim Shomer Vayusa Vayachanu. Any time that it uses plural words, they camped, they traveled. It means Noisim b'Machlokas v'Choinim b'Machlokas. It means they traveled in a state of discord and they camped in a state of discord. Aval Kan, whereas here Hushvu Kulam Leiv Echad, they all shared one sentiment, one heart. Lekachnem Vayichan Shamisol Neged Ahar, and therefore here it says that they camped as a singular entity, Vayichan, in front of the mountain. Now, you can immediately detect a number of differences between the language that Rashi uses and the language that his source, the Mechilta, uses. We'll look at three of them. Aleph, b'Mechilta nemar. The Mechilta said, Kan, here at Sinai, hushvu kulam leiv echad, they were all equated with a single heart. Rashi Pirate, he says a little bit more specifically, Keish echad, they were like one person, b'leiv echad, with one heart. Why that change? Number two, Beis. The Mechilta speaks about the fact that they traveled with discord and they camped with discord. Rashi uses two different descriptions of that discord. That there was their grumbling or complaining and their discord. Gimel, thirdly, the Mechilta then summarizes it by saying, therefore the Torah says they camped as a single entity across from the mountain or in front of the mountain. And you'll notice that Rashi only quotes the part that says Israel camped in the singular, and he doesn't mention the context that it was in front of Har Sinai, and the question is, why? And then also, one other thing we have to understand is that Rashi seems to have said something very similar to this in the previous parasha, and we need to compare the differences. Where does Rashi say something similar? We found the same content described by Rashi in a different place, but as we will note with some significant differences, in the previous parasha. Where is that? Ala pasuk, when Rashi comments on the pasuk that says Vayusu b'nei Yisrael eseneim, that the Jewish people now at the shores of the Yam Suf look up, they raise their eyes, v'nei Mitzrayim nosea achareim, and it says that Egypt was chasing after them or traveling behind them. It's in the singular. So Pirush Rashi explains nosea achareim. Why is it in the singular? B'leiv echad ki ish echad. Sounds like the same message as here, with one heart, like one person. Hare. Now, what's interesting over there is here Rashi tells us Vayichan Sham Yisroel, and we're saying that actually causes trouble for Rashi, because Yisroel is a good explanation for why Vayichan is in the singular. Why does Rashi have to give another explanation? Now in Bashalach, Rashi avoided that. He did not quote the word Mitzrayim as his header, so that you wouldn't have this question. Shaloi could be Pirush Sheikan, which is different to how he explains it over here, Yisrael, where he used the word Yisrael, and there's a very good reason why Rashi would have left out the word Mitzrayim from his headline in Bashalach, because as we ask on our Rashi here, the word Mitzrayim is a good explanation for why Nosea would be in the singular, so let's leave it out so it doesn't raise that question, because Mitzrayim could refer to a single entity called the Egyptian nation. Okay, now that we've brought up that Rashi, let's ask three questions on that Rashi as well. Aleph, number one, how does Rashi avoid the issue by not putting the word Mitzrayim into the headline? The word is still in the pasuk. Surely the question is still there. Surely the fact that the word Mitzrayim is in the pasuk raises the same question about Nu. I don't need an explanation for why Nosea is in the singular. Mitzrayim is there in the pasuk. How does Rashi avoid it by just not telling us? Base question 2. How come there Rashi says, which surely is the part that Rashi has to comment on, why does he add the word achareim, that they were chasing after the Jewish people? Why is that relevant to this discussion? Why Nosea is a singular word? Lastly, how come over here in our parasha he says that the Jews were like one person with a single heart, whereas with describing the Egyptians he says they were with a single heart like one person? So the first layer of understanding this is we can distinguish between shared experiences and unique experiences, and that will help us to understand when you say something in the singular, if it's a shared experience, or you say it in the plural, if it is an experience that's going to be unique to each person. If the Torah is talking about a group of people, or in our case a full nation, le'itim l'shein rabim or le'itim l'shein yochid, sometimes it will refer to them in the singular and sometimes in the plural. So it's quite simple to say, well, it depends on the context. What are they doing? Because when a group of people are doing something, there are two possibilities. If a whole group of people are doing the same thing in the same way, then you could refer to them as a collective, which is a singular noun. Because it is one action, although it's done by many people, it's one action. Whereas, but if a single activity is done in many different ways by a diverse crowd of people who all belong to a single entity, a single nation, then we're going to speak about it in the plural, because there isn't actually a shared experience. And so for example, if you had to say everybody put on tefillin, you could say everybody put on tefillin. Whereas if you had to say that everybody lifted a weight, everybody would have a different weight that they could lift. So tefillin you could say in the singular, and the weights you'd have to say in the plural. That's when you're talking about actions. But when you're talking about sentiment, or you're talking about thought processes, of a mass of people, Nobody feels the same way or thinks the same way. Then there's always going to be diversity of experience. Then every time we refer to a group of people feeling or thinking, it has to be in the plural because no two people feel or think the same. Therefore, it's not a matter of the pasuk changed from singular to plural in one sentence. It's irrelevant. What are we talking about? So there's no surprise then that the pasuk could refer to one group of people or an entire nation, both in singular and in plural, even in the same sentence, because it has nothing to do with consistency of the grammar. It has to do with context. What are we talking about? Is it appropriate to speak of them in a holistic sense, or is it appropriate to speak about them as individuals? Now let's use an example from Beshalach that we could relate to. Look at the pasuk we already quoted. The people saw Hashem's hand. That's a shared experience. And then, as a result of that, they had awe of Hashem and they had faith in Hashem. Seeing Hashem's hand means they actually literally saw Hashem's hand. In other words, they saw what Hashem did to the Egyptians. Everybody saw the same thing. So you can say Vayar in the singular because they all saw the same devastation of Egypt in Mitzrayim or here at the sea. But the minute we start to talk about their response, which is that they were in awe of Hashem and they now had strengthened faith in Hashem, obviously they're very diverse experiences and levels. That's why those words are in the plural, because everybody has a different experience of awe and a different experience of faith. Now, coming back to our parasha, you could say the same thing about our parasha. The pasuk in our parasha, which is Vayarom, Vayonu, Vayam Demirachik, that the people saw and then they trembled and they stood at a distance. Being in Vayar Kipshuta, they saw revelation of godliness at Sinai. Everybody saw the same thing and had the same experience. It was one vision that everybody shared equally. But the fact that they trembled, and the fact that they stood back at a distance or were thrown back a distance, these are that's personal. Different people are going to tremble different amounts depending on who they are, how sensitive they are. So therefore, it makes sense to say it in the plural because we're talking about a whole lot of very unique experiences. Now that we know that principle, let's plug it into the story of the Egyptians chasing the Jews where they are chasing in the singular, and Lahavdil, the Jews at Har Sinai camping in the singular. V'hinei, b'pasuk Paroi hikriv, the pasuk that says that Paroi drew close, v'yusu b'nei solas einayim, and the Jews raised their eyes, v'nei Mitzrayim nesei achreihem, and they found the Egyptians traveling or racing towards them. Hadgasha eina al noseya, here we're not focused on the fact that they were moving pe'ulas hanesia. We're not the pasuk's not just simply telling us the Egyptians were moving from point A to point B. The pasuk is talking about why they were moving, because they were after the Jews. That's what's interesting to us. That's the focal point of this pasuk. The Egyptians are chasing the Jews. That's their objective in this movement. It's a chasing after them being the Jewish people. Why did they chase them? Because they had a change of heart. Paro sent everybody away and then he regretted it. And the reason for that regret is because he and his people are wicked individuals who have malevolent intentions. Now, the degree of wickedness is different across the scope of Egypt. There had to be various types. Paroi, one level of hatred. The advisors and magicians who might have been even worse. The difference between those who feared Hashem and listened to Moshe's instructions during the plagues and those who didn't. And especially, what about those Egyptians who begged Paro to let the Jews go? That's why you expect the pasuk to say they, in the plural, were chasing after the Jewish people, because this is about their objective, because they hate the fact they let the Jews go, and that's different to each Egyptian. You expect noisim in the plural. Therefore, that's why Rashi has to explain and say, actually, they all shared the same sentiment like one person. In other words, he's telling us, Adarabba, contrary to what you would expect, the fact that it says Nosea in the singular, is not because they are Mitzrayim, a collective nation, and therefore grammatically it works to say Nosea in the singular, but it's Nosea. Why? Because they have a shared objective of Achareim. That's why the word Achareim is part of his headline. They're all joined in the pursuit of the Jewish people, because their chasing after the Jewish people was like a fish not as you would have expected, with a whole different array of how important they felt it was to chase the Jewish people, or how angry they were. That's what you would have expected, but it turns out that they all had a shared hatred and urgency to bring the Jews back. A single heart with equal hatred to the Jewish people, and because of that hatred, that's why they united as one person, which is Valkena Sederhu. Why Rashi specifies the order of events with the Egyptians is first belev echad, a shared hatred, a shared feeling, and that causes ki'ish echad, a united front of people. Now, derech zeh, using that information, moving b'pirish ha'pasuk vayichan sham yisrael neged ahar, we can extrapolate to how to understand the pasuk lahavdil about the Jewish people camping in a singular fashion at Har Sinai. The fact that the Jews were geographically in that place, Torah has already told us that in this pasuk, Vayachanu bamidbar, they camped in the desert. If we already know geographically that they're in the Sinai desert, we must then assume that the additional words that say, and the nation camped there by the mountain, is actually there to clarify for us what it means that they camped. That now it's no longer speaking about the geographical location or their physical arrival in the place. Now it's elucidating for us what their attitude is to receive the Torah, because this is the event that's going to happen in this place. And now that's going to raise a question. The spiritual soul preparation that is required, which of course is related to the degree of enthusiasm and preparation to receive the Torah, surely must have been in a totally different experience for every Jew. It had to be. Each person relative to where they are in their spiritual status and journey. The highest experience of preparing for Matan Torah with Moshe himself. Then Aaron v'shivim hazkenim, Aaron and the elders. Then then you have all the other different levels of the Jewish people. Then you get to the opposite extreme from where Moshe is, to the Jew who, even after seeing the great miracle of Yamsuf, says, is Hashem really with us? There's a massive spectrum of what kind of Jews are standing at Mount Sinai, so you expect that there's a massive difference of spiritual readiness. And that's what Rashi notices. Well, in that context, the logic would have dictated that the word to describe how this whole mass of people is at Mount Sinai has to be a plural word, because they're so diverse. Why is it in the singular? That's what Rashi is addressing. How does he address it? How does he address it? By not only telling us Vayichan, that's the big word that bothers us, and not only Shom, that this was a unique experience, but Vayichan Shom Yisrael, as we'll see later, he specifically leaves out the words that it occurred when they were at the mountain. Because Rashi wants us to understand that the Torah is telling us Shekavonas HaKosev Kani, Shebetur Yisrael, that as Jewish people, that was the unifying factor. We're all Jews, who have absolute unity with each other. אבל לא שכן היה מצד המידוסים לפי דרגויסים בהכונה וברצון נגד ההור לקבלת התורה. But Rashi leaves out the fact that it's at the mountain, because at the mountain would imply it's the fact that they are preparing for getting the Torah that is the equalizer. And that's for sure not the equalizer, because to prepare to get the Torah, everybody's vastly different. But to be there as a one nation, as a Yisrael, probably for the first time in history, to stand as Yisrael completely united because of who we are, that's what's happening over there. Because of this incredible unity that they experienced, that aroused within them this shared sentiment. That changed what should have naturally happened, that everybody should have had a different kind of motivation to receive the Torah. Because of their incredible unity as Yisrael, that produces Lev Echad, a shared sentiment of readiness and enthusiasm to receive the Torah. This is the fundamental difference between the unity of heart and person as it is with the Egyptians, or the unity of person and heart which the Jews have. In the context of Egypt, the fact that they unite is not because they're a united nation. The fact that they unite is because they have a shared objective. The shared objective is, let's get the Jews. But if you analyze them independently of this scenario, as an Egyptian nation, they were never united. Couldn't be united. That's why there, when Rashi uses the headline to introduce that pasuk, he focuses on the words Nosea, where the unity happens, and Achareim, why the unity happens, because they're chasing the Jewish people. And he leaves out the word Mitzrayim because there's no unifying factor of being Egyptian. Whereas when you deal with the Jewish people, the fact that the Jews are a single organism is because of who they are, not because of their objective or where they're going or what their intention is. It's intrinsic. That's why here Rashi specifies the word Yisrael is key to understanding the process, because it is the Yisrael that brings them all together. And because they have this fundamental intrinsic unity as Jewish people, it produces a unified objective and a unified sentiment to receive the Torah. And that's uniquely Rashi's perspective. And that's why Rashi doesn't say the same words as the Mechilta, because the Mechilta doesn't highlight this perspective. According to the Mechilta, it's the shared experience and the sentiment to receive the Torah that unites them. That they all had a shared enthusiasm to receive the Torah. That's why the Mechilta adds, therefore it says, the Mechilta wants to say it's because of where they are, because they have a shared objective, that creates the unity. Rashi is saying it's because of who they are, regardless of where they are. They have absolute unity, and in this case it produces a way of behaving and feeling in context of where they are. Now, based on this, Rashi is effectively designating two different parts of the pasuk. First of all, that there's an intrinsic unity of the Jewish people, and then there's an outcome which produces a singular heart, which is a shared motivation to receive the Torah. With that in mind, Rashi that will solve why Rashi, unlike the Mechilta, uses two descriptions for the discord. What's Rashi implying? Because based on how Rashi's explained that the Torah emphasizes specifically Vayichan Sham Yisrael, that there's a Jewish unity which is playing out over here, and then translates in a unity behind the Torah. So it says Sham, this unique experience of unity was only at Har Sinai, not at other places. Everywhere else they camped, but Taromas of Machloikas there were issues. What do you mean there were issues? There are two elements of unity that happen at Har Sinai, and unfortunately both of those elements are absent throughout the desert. Aleph, there's Machloikas beinehem. There's discord between the Jewish people themselves, which is the opposite of at Har Sinai, where they are a single person. Beis Tarumas, the second thing is there's a lot of grumbling, that's the complaining against Hashem. That's the Kabbalah Satira. That's the opposite of their shared sentiment of being enthusiastic to receive the Torah. Now, in this Rashi, we get this amazing, beautiful spiritual insight. The world as we know it is a place of conflict, diversity, discord. That's how they allowed it to be. In its default state, our world does not present in a way that you see the link and connection and symbiosis of every single thing that exists. Of course, they're ecosystems, but we don't see the symbiosis of everything. If that's true for the whole world, it is certainly true of humans. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu baras bnei Adam b'ofen shein echad bneihem doimeh lechaveiroi. The Eibusha created us that no two of us are alike. Ve'ein dayosem shavos. Our thought processes and outlooks are not the same. V'adav mashpia af ala polos, which leads us obviously to behave differently to each other. And because the way we behave is a product of how we think and feel. So the behaviors of different people are unique and sometimes even clash. That's our world, a world of discord and disparity. Is it the goal? No. In order to have unity, which is the goal of the world, in our world, that's in order to produce true unity in our world, we have to expose the truth, which is Hashem Echad. That Hashem, who is of course the source of the world, is one. So disparity can't really be a real thing. Bearing that in mind, that the world is a naturally discordant place, and our goal is to reveal Hashem's oneness in the world. With that in mind, let's look at the distinction between how Rashi and the Mechil to explain this camping of the Jews at Har Sinai. There are two possible channels through which we can reveal Hashem into the world and the oneness of Hashem in the world. Both of those channels belong outside of the world or beyond the world or greater than the world. And they are HaTorah v'Yisro, the Torah on the one hand, the Jewish people on the other, as we well know, the Midrash tells us. That's why the world was created, to facilitate what Jews have to do through the Torah. Now, if you take the approach of the Mechilta, the concept of being able to bring what the Torah introduces to the world, this otherworldly perspective, Poal al Bnei Yisrael af koydem lochein, already started to influence the state of the Jewish people before the Torah was actually given. Bisman shel erev Matan Torah, in the close proximity of the days leading up to Matan Torah, shekvar b'yisashah, that already at that time, b'voyim al midbar Sinai, as soon as they came into the staging area of Matan Torah, hushvu kulam le'vechad Kabbalah Torah, the Mechilta says already then there was this sense and awareness of what Torah is supposed to affect, and it rubbed off on them. They had a shared perspective and enthusiasm to receive the Torah. Whereas Rashi, who always explains in the most simple way that you could understand, practically this event is still prior to Matan Torah. Rashi says it doesn't make logical sense to say an event that hasn't yet happened will already have an influence over the people. And therefore he says that the unity expressed over here has to be unity that came from within, that came from the Jewish people themselves. From the depth of their neshama, the highest part of the neshama called Yechida, which is completely beyond the reality of what is logical. It's at the logical level that people are disparate. It's at the soul level that people are united. Here they expose their soul. They experience that DNA, that atomic center of Judaism that lives inside every single one of us, and not in the brain, by the way. It's not a product of the brain, but it's something you experience in your heart. And it's something that was already shared and exposed to the Jewish people as they left Mitzrayim. And that's why they had this amazing unity already, even before the Torah comes into their lives. And the truth is, as Rashi describes, because they were experiencing such a deep dimension of their own neshamas, and that caused them to have this amazing unity, that is what motivated them to have this massive drive to receive the Torah. Now, even though, as we've just described, the truest unity that Jews have is a product of the depth and essence of our neshamas, which is something only Jews could experience. Nevertheless, because the Eibishter created the world in mirror fashion, where whatever exists in the holy realities has a counterpart in the not so holy realities. So only Jewish people can have the ultimate sense of innate unity, but the rest of the world also has some degree of unity. Because it is natural for the forces of Klippa to mimic and to ape human behavior or Jewish behavior. So if Jews are fundamentally united, the world wants to also have nationhood and sense of unity. And that's why the Egyptians could also experience an experience of complete unity, a shared heart, which was so powerful that it brought them together almost as if they were a single person. But as we've mentioned, there's a very big difference between their and our experience. The nations of the world don't share a yechidah shebenefesh concept, so they can't truly unite because of some essential intrinsic union. They can only unite behind a cause, in this case the cause being the hatred of the Jewish people. But when you're dealing with the Jewish people, where our neshama is our truest self, that could produce within us the truest type of unity, because we are unified in reality, and then it's just a matter of experiencing it. Now, we've just mentioned that this incredible unity that is the product of the Yechidah Shebenefesh cannot be replicated amongst other nations. Despite that, because we know that one of the very important effects of Matan Torah was that it broke down the barrier that had previously existed between the high and lower realms, between godliness and the created reality. So because there's a barrier that was removed by the giving of the Torah, therefore that had an effect on nations of other nations as well. That even non-Jewish people are now empowered to get in touch with the godliness that is within them. The fact that they can be conscious of the godliness within them, within the world, the source of true unity, that can present them with the opportunity for some degree of actually feeling united. That would be similar to the unity that we as Jewish people feel. Obviously it won't be identical, because they don't have the capacity as we are blessed to have because of our neshamas to tune in to godliness that is exponentially beyond the world. It's only when you can link into that really, really elevated level of godliness that can have true unity. But the fact is that the Torah has empowered nations of the world to be able to unite, which is an incredible thing. And not just unite, but to unite with an awareness of godliness. So the fact that the giving of the Torah presented an opportunity to every human on the planet to be able to connect with godliness in a level at a level that is beyond the comprehension of the human mind and beyond what divides us. This is something that actually translates into practical halacha. As the Rambam famously says, that when the non-Jews fulfill the 7 laws, they are capable of doing so not just because it makes sense, And not only because of the historical reality that God commanded these things to Adam and then to Noach, but the halacha is that they should commit to the 7 Noach laws because that is what the Torah mandates. And it's information that was passed to us through Moshe Rabbeinu, that those rules previously given to the children of Noach are relevant to every human on the planet. As the Gemara Sanhedrin tells us, every one of us has to believe and say, the world was created for me. Which means the entire gamut of creation, from the most immobile, inanimate object all the way to the most sophisticated human. And therefore the world was created with a responsibility that I have to take to turn this world into a place of godliness. Therefore every single Jewish person has to do everything in their power, not only to educate Jewish people with Torah and Chassidus, but also to have an influence over non-Jewish people to commit to the 7 Noach laws, and not just to commit to them, but but that they should commit to those laws because that's what Hashem said in the Torah, and that way will bring Achdus to the world, the ultimate Achdus of the revelation of godliness in the time of Mashiach now.